Over 10 years ago, I wrote this book. It was this book, not this one, but this one. It was about what life would look like under the United Nations Agenda 21 program, which a few years after the book's publication, suddenly they decided to change the name to Agenda 2030. The United Nations has been working towards this dystopian plan for decades now, rebranding it every few years. Today, you may know it as the Great Reset 2030. We saw this coming years ago, but what I never could have imagined is how much help these power-hungry global elites would have from society's biggest institutions, big tech, mega corporations, universities, even our own intelligence agencies. They're all in on it. And tonight, I'll show you how. I'll show you just how far along we are in this dystopian timeline, and more importantly, where we're headed next. Man, come in here, Chad. Come here. Get a close-up of that. That's me. That's me. 10 years ago, now. I have let myself go. Now I don't know. Now I look like Matlock. Well, you know, Your Honor, I'm not sure. Does our witness actually believe that? I don't know why he sounded like Clinton there for a second. All right. There's a question that I keep getting, and I'm sure you're thinking it as well. Is he serious in those clothes? What the hell is happening to our country? Nothing makes sense, right? Does this make sense?
Oh my gosh, she looks so stunning in every single one of you. Dressed to the nines.
This is going to be the fiercest party Lynchburg has ever seen. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, sisters. Let's do a cocktail.
Let's do a cocktail. We should make a Jack Fire Cranberry.
Yes, we should. Come on, I'll help.
Was there a pressure campaign from the citizens of Tennessee to feature drag queens with Jack Daniel's whiskey? I think the answer is obviously no. By the way, straight whiskey. But there was a pressure campaign, just not from any people you know. The question I wanted to answer tonight is, who's doing all this and why? Because I think it's a major distraction. The real stuff is being done, and we're not really arguing much about that. We just keep arguing, why is that drag queen in my first grader's class? So much of what we're seeing right now doesn't make sense if you look at it through the wrong lens. Look at some of the stories just over the past few weeks and months. The Germans, in the middle of an energy war, an energy crisis and a war in Europe, they just shut down their last nuclear power plant. How does that make sense? Don't worry. We're no better. This is the United States. You know, our Energy Information Administration is bragging now that reliable energy will account for 98% of the power plant's retirements this year. Wait, what? 98%? Yes. It will account for 15.6 gigawatts of American energy. Now, I know that Doc Brown was freaking out over 121 gigawatts. Yes. Now, unless the government has some master plan to channel more than 15 bolts of lightning, and you only need it when that DeLorean passes under the wire, we might be having a problem soon. Here's another one. Europe is forcing farmers to adapt to their ridiculous regulations over climate or have their land seized by the government. This is how Europe does it. Because they have a lot more unchecked power than we do. They don't have a Bill of Rights. We do. I mean, nobody in Congress or in the administration is reading it, but we have it. That's why we need all the extra distractions. Big government will always find a way. The Farm Bill expires this year, and it's up for a revote. Joe Biden in the White House, this couldn't come at a worse time. They're already trying to sneak in climate action and radical equity into the Farm Bill. Europe, here we come. We are being hit on multiple fronts, including college campuses, corporations that are all but being forced to have offices of diversity and equity and inclusion that operate some sort of political commissar for the radical left. Who else does that? The Chinese Communist Party, that's right. Got to make sure everybody stays in line with the ideological agenda. So now, why is this all happening right now? None of it makes sense, but it all becomes a lot more obvious if you look at it through the right lens. And it's a lens that people on TV are not going to tell you about. I wrote this book again with this sexy, sexy man on the back. This book, Agenda 21, I wrote it as a fictional warning. And when I say I wrote it, I actually asked somebody else to write it. That's why her name is down here, Harriet Park. But I wrote it. Anyway, this is a fictional warning of what might look like if the UN and global elites were successful with Agenda 21. Agenda 21 was the Great Reset long before the overlords in the Davos camp came up with that. Again, this was fictional. I wanted to show you what life might be like under Agenda 21. But listen to some of the things that I described back in 2012. See if any of it sounds familiar. There is no president, no Congress, no Supreme Court, no freedom. Let me ask you, have you ever known a time where we question whether we actually have a president right now? Who's running the White House? What is Congress doing? Biden has stated multiple times that he is the one that takes the orders. We have a figurehead in chief that speaks when his handlers tell him to, and only what they tell him to say. And what does Congress do? What are they doing right now? We've seen multiple times when either party controls both the House and the Senate, nothing happens except bad stuff. Does anyone seriously trust Congress or the Senate anymore? The left wants to pack the Supreme Court. They're currently trying to discredit the Supreme Court justices that are on the right. What happens after that? What's the real purpose once they destroy the Supreme Court? And freedom. How quickly our freedom is slipping through our fingers and becoming a thing of the past. COVID-19 proved that all too painfully. And who's paid for that? There is no consequence to anyone's bad actions unless it's yours or mine. The book also described a world where private farmland was a thing of the past. Farms were state-owned in the name of climate protection. I just showed you how the farmers and their farms are all over under attack all over the world. The book described a government that enacts new media laws so you could only get the approved message.
Federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other folks on Fox do, it is very, very clearly incitement of violence. Very clearly incitement of violence. And that is the line that I think we have to be willing to contend with.
We do. That freedom of speech, it hasn't worked for over 200 years. Federal regulations to decide what is allowed to be said, and they will decide what is or isn't incitement of violence. In Agenda 21, I described the roles of families and how our children were all collectively owned.
Rebecca put a teacher's creed into words when she said, "There's no such thing as someone else's child. No such thing as someone else's child. Our nation's children are all our children."
Parenting advice from a man that raised Hunter Biden. Take that for what it's worth. But collective ownership on our children has been a socialist and progressive talking point for over a century. They just don't usually say it out loud. But the mask has come off. In this dystopian world, people were moved into planned communities, very similar to the 15-minute city project that you might just be hearing about now. The World Economic Forum has a council of the future of cities where they plan what they call smart cities. This is how they see our future, not theirs, but ours. 15 minutes. Everything you need, you can walk to within 15 minutes. Oh, that's going to be great. How are you going to do that? Is CVS really going to just build a pharmacy in some of those bad 15-minute areas? Or are they going to be government mandated? The citizens in my book receive their instruction and their news from something called social update meetings. It's where they were told what behavior was now acceptable. I'm going to go into this more later on the program, but diverse equity and inclusion, also known as social governance in ESG, sounds an awful lot like that. It's scary because we are almost there. Rereading this, I wish I could go back and when we were writing Agenda 21, knowing what I know now, I would write a real world forward to the show and show you how we got there. A timeline to dystopia and what it would look like. I'm going to show you this. What we never pieced together until the last few years. Agenda 21 was first introduced back in 1992. It was from the United Nations. Anybody who spoke out about it, they spoke out and said they're going to start to take over the national parks and they want to have everybody live where they say. No, that's a conspiracy theory. Sound familiar? Then in 1997, they had the Kyoto Protocol. It was established to start taking Agenda 21 from concept to reality. In the end, too many nations, including us, pulled out. Remember the Kyoto Treaty? It's going to be bad for America. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. The rest of the timeline is everything I wish I would have known when we wrote Agenda 21. In 2015, Agenda 21 received its first rebranding. Okay? The UN now called it Agenda 2030. It was all the same crap, but we had done so much damage, you and me, by exposing it. It's like what's happening now to the World Economic Forum. Once you're on it and you know it and it makes sense, it spreads like wildfire. And they can't dismiss you as a crazy kook anymore. So 2015 was also the year that they first started using Build Back Better and putting ESG in its place. The United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction used the words describing the need to make changes in the face of a disaster. I want you to read this document yourself, but a lot of the climate and equity mumbo jumbo that we're seeing actually enacted right now is described in these 37 pages. And similar to the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Accord went into effect. Paris Accord went into effect in 2016 to start implementing Agenda 2030. But you remember, what was one of the first things Donald Trump did? He pulled us out of the Paris Accord, and that drove everybody crazy. We all cheered, and we wondered why people cared so much why was this so important? But something came back to put everything back on track. He railroaded it off the tracks. But what happened? COVID-19, the pandemic in 2019, 2020. This did what I never thought or could imagine would happen in America. It brought the world's corporate elites to move in parallel with the government policymakers. That brings us to today. You're here. The fundamental transformation of America. Those seeds were planted long ago, and Barack Obama said that. We're 5 days away. This is what's happening. I told you there'd come a time when you wouldn't recognize your country anymore. I don't. This is not the country that I grew up in. I don't even understand it. I don't understand justice, and it's not just because I dress like this, with nobody could understand. I want you to do me a favor. If you have been feeling like you've lost your country and you are sad, I want you to mourn for it, because you got to get that out of the way. The country as we know it is gone, but that doesn't mean we can't still save freedom and our principles. But you can't be mourning your country when the fight is just about to begin. Get it out of the way. The date and year of what I described in this book, Agenda 21, is still in question. But when you look at everything through the lens of this book, and quite honestly, this book, and the next one, Dark Future, which comes out in July, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the Great Reset, this is now the establishment, and it is not partisan. This machine does not care about politics. This machine pitted us against each other to keep us fighting with one another so we wouldn't see that our freedom was being stolen, quite honestly, by many people in both parties. This is about the consolidation of power up at the top and the subjugation of everyone else. We are at the spot in the timeline where our government institutions are being turned now against us. Intelligence agencies, federal law enforcement, big corporations, finance, universities, insurance companies, everything. This is where we are, and I'll show you what it all means and what we're really fighting next. Your dog is going to thank you. No, I'm serious. I mean, assuming he can speak English. Maybe he's like Scooby. Thank you. But he's gonna love, or she is gonna love, rough greens. This is what I feed my dog Uno, and I want him to have a happy, healthy life. And it was sad the other day. The old man, he's just turning into an old man. He's all gray, and he was laying on the floor, and I was walking outside, and he just did this. He's slowing down, but boy, I tell you, Rough Greens, I think Rough Greens gave him at least an extra year. I don't have any way to prove that, but he changed when we first started feeding him Rough Greens. And he became a puppy again. And I can't thank them enough for the extra time they have given us with Uno. It's a supplement you sprinkle on top of your dog's food. It gives them all the vitamins, nutrients, probiotics, antioxidants, everything your dog needs. They love it. Get your first bag free. Just go to roughgreens.com/Beck. That's roughgreens.com/Beck. Hi, I'm Tucker Carlson. I'm only wearing the bow tie so you recognize me. When it comes to Agenda 21 and the Great Reset, we are in the stage of rapid transformation. And this can't happen with people like Tucker Carlson exposing the agents of transformation every night on cable news. This is why I believe he parted ways. They didn't fire him. Oh no. He was the only person in mainstream media that would stand up and say things like, yeah, it looks like maybe the CIA killed JFK. Sounds nuts, but what are we supposed to believe with the new information coming out? The media is supposed to be antagonistic toward the government. It is their main job, but they're not. They're antagonistic to the people. They're supposed to be skeptical, not of the people, but of the people with power. But that's not who they are anymore. They are now in lockstep with the establishment, and they run cover for organizations like the Pentagon, CIA, big tech, and anyone else progressing the agenda. Do you trust the media? Do you trust the CIA? Tucker Carlson was always critical of the CIA and also worried about the war. Then the Pentagon came out and trashed him. Let me show you this. This is a document from the sworn declaration of a 9/11 investigator with the Office of Military Commissions, part of the Department of Defense's Military Commissions Defense Organization. This document is dated July 20th, 2021. Now, it first appeared on a former Washington Post journalist Substack, Jeff Stein's Spy Talk. Now, before I go any further, have you heard anything new at all regarding the 9/11 investigation in the last 10 years? Anything? Have you heard anything about the newly discovered sworn declaration anywhere in the mainstream media? I saw it once. Maybe there's nothing to it. Well, I mean, nothing is probably a little too harsh. Just the allegation from multiple FBI agents that the CIA was running an illegal domestic spy agency inside the United States. The declaration says that the Saudis were being used as intermediaries to recruit al-Qaeda operatives for the CIA. Quote, al-Bawami was an intelligence, it could be Salami, I don't know how to pronounce. Anyway, he was an intelligence officer in the employ of the Saudi government. He was, quote, directed to attempt to recruit two of the 9/11 hijackers at the Saudi consulate in Los Angeles. This declaration alleges the CIA knew the hijackers were inside the United States, and they wanted to work with them, to recruit them through an illegal domestic espionage operation, and hid everything from the FBI. This information just came out. Does anybody find that interesting? Does anybody find it interesting that it's not everywhere in the mainstream media? I mean, the CIA was running illegal operations that accidentally led to the worst tragedy on American soil. I mean, that seems kind of newsworthy. Where's the curiosity from the press? Is it a problem of sourcing? Well, let's see. This account comes after the interviews of 11 ex-FBI agents, 2 ex-CIA agents, a CNN investigative journalist, former Deputy of National Security Advisor Richard Clarke, and former Senator Bob Graham from Florida, a Democrat. He was the co-chair of Congress's joint inquiry into 9/11. I don't know. It's an amazing claim. It seems to have a lot of sources, but the media doesn't care. And why? This is such an important thing. Why? Because the media, just as it was in the 60s and 70s, and perhaps before that, as we discovered in the 70s, is almost a wholly owned operation of our federal government and our spy agencies. They are the establishment now. Calling out the CIA hurts the narrative. They all of their sources, former intelligence, nameless former intelligence, nameless source at the intelligence community, all of that, everything that's happened in the last 10 years is coming from those sources. And they never question it after they've been burned time and time again? No. They're not actually curious. Now, we just found out that the former CIA deputy director, in cooperation with the Biden campaign, orchestrated the smear of the Hunter Biden laptop story as Russian disinformation. Remember when everybody said, well, we're going to get to the bottom of this? They already knew. When asked by Congressman Jordan why he did this, his answer, simple. Because I wanted him to win the election, Biden. I wanted him to win the election. And 50 former high-level intelligence officials helped. 50 CIA agents are now agents of establishment of transformation. This is where we are. But they're not alone. Multiple Pentagon officials cheered the fact that Tucker Carlson was gone. Cheered. Censorship is now a Department of Defense priority. The most recent Twitter files expose the DOD that has been actively working with their private partners to silence freedom of speech in the United States. All of this is unconstitutional. They awarded $1 billion, a contract of your money, $1 billion of your tax money to an American technology company to combat misinformation. The Twitter files document dump revealed multiple email chains between members of big tech, the DOD, and what a surprise, the universities. The government, the military, the federal law enforcement, and intelligence are all teaming up and spending your money to shut you down and control what you hear or see. Just look at all the things that were conspiracy theories that are now true. I don't know why your friends don't get it. Maybe they don't want to get it. Maybe they never will get it. I don't know. But if you don't get it and have a backbone, recognize the evil that you fight, call it by name, and dismiss it, stand against it, you're going to end up on the wrong side. 2 years ago, there was a whistleblower that exposed Google was operating Blacklist to hide search results. Remember that? For some reason, they didn't want anyone finding the information on the Las Vegas mass shooting. Remember? Couldn't get an answer. They were also blacklisting information on terrorist attacks that happened in New York City. Now, why would they do that? Was the FBI asking them to? Would the FBI ever ask Google to censor you personally? Surely not me, right? Oh, yeah, there I am. I'm on the list. They're all working together inside our country. They view you as an enemy. They're all working together to change how you think, to limit what you see. And with AI on the horizon, once that kicks in, gang, Michael Schellenberger recently pointed out that Facebook now has taken a side on who blew up the Nordstrom Pipeline. Facebook. Why would Facebook even have any skin in the game for that if it wasn't government pressure? If you try and post the article by Seymour Hersh that blames the United States, Facebook now rates it false. And then they send you a fact check by the Norwegian website Factstink. Now, that's a stupid name in the first place, but I find this interesting. Norway was implicated in Hersh's article as having helped the United States blow up the pipeline. Also, Factstink, or whatever it is a cooperation that includes the Norwegian Broadcasting Company, state-run media. The agents of transformation have declared what it is or what it isn't, what's acceptable to say, what's not. They're telling us the questions we are allowed to ask, and there will be no dissent. Most of this is going on in secret, but I tell you, sometimes our dystopian future is debated out in the public. Listen to this debate in Minnesota on legislation called the Bias Registry Bill. Watch.
Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Vang. If a Minnesotan writes an article claiming or arguing that COVID-19 is a Chinese bioweapon that leaked from a lab in Wuhan, and someone reports that article to the Department of Human Rights, is that something that the Department of Human Rights should put in their bias registry under your bill?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Niska, not all incidents are considered, I guess, violent or criminal, as I said before. And so this clearly, if with the rhetoric that we have seen since the pandemic and regarding accusing Asians of bringing in the coronavirus, that is bias motivated. And so that can be considered a bias incident.
I don't care if it was Martians that did it. I really don't care. I don't care if it was my next door neighbor that did it. I want to know who did it and then make sure they don't do it again. What's being proposed is a database that tracks unapproved speech. And did you hear her thought process there? It reveals how these measures will be used to stop literally anything they want from going public. She starts off by admitting she doesn't see the Wuhan lab leak theory as being a violent thing or criminal. But then she word salads her way into finding an excuse to say, well, it actually is. Again, this is the point on the timeline we find ourselves. But one of the biggest difference from what was happening when I was writing Agenda 21 is the public-private partnerships that have arisen to ensure our dark future actually happens this time. Doesn't mean it's going to. Doesn't mean it has to. It will if we don't educate ourselves and stand up. Big corporations, big finance, even the universities that teach our children have joined into this fight. Let me ask you something. Are you paying a university to educate your child? If the answer is yes, I'd like you to tell me why. Why are you paying these universities to corrupt everything that you've done? Do you think that a degree so they can get a job that probably won't exist because of AI, you think that's worth risking their soul? Stop it. Stop. More in a minute. Americans are fed up with woke corporation companies that take in millions, sometimes billions of dollars, all while lashing out against the country that gave them the opportunity in the first place. You don't like Bud Light because of what they did? Great. You don't have to put up with it. Give me a Miller. Okay. Now, you haven't been able to do that with a lot of companies. For instance, I make the case Disney. How are you going to do that? They've got your kids roped into it. Like, you're not going to take me to see Mickey. But what are you going to do with that $300,000 that it's going to cost us to go for a week? You can't get around Disney. You can get around Big Mobile. Now with Patriot Mobile. They are America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. I want everyone in this audience to get your dependable nationwide coverage from any of the three main networks because they're all on the same towers. You'll get your best service. You will get the best price, a coverage guarantee. If you don't like the coverage, you can switch to a different network for free. They make this all easy. But listen, they are fighting with us, not against us. Will you please make the change tonight? 100% U.S.-based customer service team is waiting for you now. They will make switching easy. Go to patriotmobile.com/Beck. Or you can call them at 878-PATRIOT, 878-PATRIOT. patriotmobile.com/Beck. Free activation if you use the promo code Beck. Listen up. 2020 was a massive turning point for Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. What was mostly an initiative talked about within the halls of the UN now had full partnership from the elites that gather in Davos every year. Then the concentration became, how can we force this radical transformation on every corporation, every bank, every financial institution, every farmer in the world? The solution was a model that dated back to the Obama administration. Occupy Wall Street. Listen to this. This time, the pressure campaign wouldn't come from the street activists. It would come from the largest financial institutions in the world. It was very, very clear what they planned to do based off their 2020 World Economic Forum guest list. One of the attendees was the co-founder of Occupy Wall Street. Now, I want to show you this quote. "Rejecting Davos is easy when one hasn't been invited. But now that I have a chance to go, I want to discover its revolutionary potential." This is crazy. This is the guy who started to Occupy Wall Street. Co-founder, who once organized mass protest against the people like Klaus Schwab and all of those big businesses and banks. Just a few years prior, he hated everything about the people that gathered in Davos. Why does he see them as an ally now? Yeah, ask that question, demand an answer. Keep in mind the date here, January 2020. The COVID pandemic was just kicking off, and the Great Reset was being branded revolutionary change that was coming. And while organizations like the intelligence community, FBI, big tech, they were the agents of transformation. Big finance, big corporations would finance that transformation. Activists no longer needed to camp outside in front of banks or Wall Street anymore. People like Larry Fink at Blackwater would do that for you from the boardroom. Big finance like BlackRock have their tentacles in nearly every major corporation in the country. Their main goals appear to be two things: force compliance and force transformation. We need to consider their meddling in every major decision and move that these companies take. Let me just take one: the firing of Tucker Carlson. BlackRock owns over 45 million shares of Fox Corporation. Now, if the entire purpose of ESG, pushed heavily by BlackRock, is to push investments to clean energy and ideologically approved companies, why did it just a few months ago invest so heavily in Fox? See, this gets into the nuts and bolts of what the elites at the WEF and big finance are actually doing to force the transformation. Check out this interview between New York Times and Larry Fink.
Behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we are doing internally is, if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just,
of course they are.
You have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted.
That's the blueprint. That is also blackmail, okay? Or I don't know, hostage taking. You do as I say. He just admitted that his investments are the new Occupy Wall Street. As Klaus Schwab would say, they penetrate cabinets, or in this case, boardrooms, and they use their voting leverage to force behavior. That's not a free market. Larry Fink telegraphed this over 2 years ago, sending a written notice to boardrooms all over the country. And talk about infiltration. Look at the list of some of the largest companies they now have major influence with. I'm going to put this list up at glennbeck.com. Just scroll through it and see the industries that are represented. Gaming companies, media, energy, communication, insurance, cars, real estate, food and soft drinks. You got it. From these boardrooms, they can push any message they want from some of the largest culture-driving forces in the world. They can influence car companies to go electric, fossil fuel energy plants to retire early, maybe even a media company to fire the most popular opinion personality in the United States. And if anyone in the media tries to say, this is a no big deal, that's not what they were saying in 2018 before the pandemic. They were all but cheering BlackRock's bully tactics. The transformation on the banking industry and corporate America has been quick and lethal, and it spans nearly every industry. Due to a BlackRock credit facility of $4.4 billion, Wells Fargo is now offering cheap loans to companies that adhere to racial and gender quotas. Bank of America encourages their employees to become, quote, woke at work. And the United States is a system of white supremacy. Learn it or you're out. BlackRock owns 509 million shares in Bank of America. Lockheed Martin sent their white male employees to a 3-day diversity training program to address their white male culture and other white male privilege. BlackRock shares in Lockheed, nearly 18 million. We could do this all night long. These dots are so easy to connect, it's painfully obvious. They're not hiding it anymore. Follow the money. Big finance assumes that they have more money and influence than you do, the consumer. Although I think the people at Budweiser are learning differently. Bud Light, Dylan Mulvaney, that story proves otherwise. Show these companies who their real boss is while you still can. Together, you can stop the financiers of transformation before it's too late. Back in a minute. I just read a stat today that, what is it? It was accreditation hacks now trying to get your information is up this last quarter 525%. Okay, that seems a little significant. People, and now with AI too, it is going to turbo, and you'll lose things like your home. I know it sounds crazy, but nobody's watching over your home title. And it is so incredibly easy to take your home's title. They take it, they sign it over from you, fake your signature, over to them. Then they go to a bank and say, hey, I got the title of this home. I want to, borrow money. You don't know until they've got the money and they're out. And you're never going to find them again. And then a sheriff knocks on your door and you're like, what are you doing squatting in this house? It's the only time they'll ever care about anybody squatting in a house. Home Title Lock. It'll help shut this down. It's what they do. I want you to go to HomeTitleLock.com right now, HomeTitleLock.com. Find out for free with a sign-up if your house has already been stolen. Get 30 days of free protection when you use the promo code BECK at HomeTitleLock.com. Over the last few years, I have talked a lot about how dangerous ESG is. It is the leverage for this transformation of the economy, society, everything. And we have seen a lot of success against the E, not so much against the S and the G. The model is Florida. I showed you how big finance is using G, governance, to force behavior in corporations all over the country. But the S, social, is just as dangerous. In my book, Agenda 21, people got their approved instructions and behavior from things called social update meetings. That is exactly what the S in the ESG is all about. It is a mechanism that pushes society into an approved narrative of behavior. I'm telling you, we're going to have transabled people. People who say, I was born in the wrong body, I need you to cut my arm off. And I'm telling you, one day you're going to wake up and they're going to be like, that's not wrong. Doctors should remove their good leg if they feel they were in the wrong body. You have to decide right now, that good or bad, and why. Your friends, I bet you have friends that you could pose that to, and they'd say, well, what business is of yours? Don't look anywhere but to God. Don't look at other people's values, anything else. They want you to look to the government. They will tell you what to think and believe in. I am telling you, look only to God. Not any show, not any voice, not me. Don't believe anything I say. I'm not asking for your trust. The S is currently being pushed by something called diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's DEI. It's popping up in companies all over the country now. This list of companies is how they now have fully staffed DEI offices, and it is staggering. There's a short list. I'll have a link at glennbeck.com. The industries include big tech, credit card companies, communications, financial institutions, healthcare, heavy equipment, energy, big pharma, everything. Google even produces an annual diversity report where they brag just about how woke they are. For most of the biggest corporations in the country now, hiring the most talented people and promotion based on merit is no longer part of the system. It is now all a quota system to make sure that every race, every gender is fully represented. Representation drives employment, not talent, not ability, not smarts. We know that much is being forced, in the words of Larry Fink, on corporations by big finance. It is also being used as programming on an entire generation. Our children, through our universities, through our television, through social media, through everything, are being told that inclusion by exclusion is the new proper way of thinking. It is not. Before you sign that next tuition check, Take a look at your child's core requirements for a basic degree. This is not in the old days where you're like, oh yeah, we had some crazy professors. This isn't that. This is fundamental transformation. This is the end of the American way of life. It is the end of the traditional family. It is the end of being a Christian and allowed to say it out loud. Many universities now require multiple courses in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is that what you want to put your money towards? Why are we paying thousands of dollars for people to tell a white male child that he's inherently racist? A report by the Heritage Foundation found the average university had over 45 DEI staff spread out over every department in the school. DEI nonsense is forced into everything they will learn, be it math, science, English, all of it. You want to know how the younger generation actually accepts something like the 1619 Project? Say it's real? This report found that the DEI staff outnumbered the staff in history departments by 1 to 3 times. The entire generation is being programmed, and they're leaving real history out and then reprogramming with bogus stuff. Ask your kids about any of the founders. Ask your kids' friends about anyone. I just met a bunch of teenagers recently, and I asked them simple stuff about history. Nothing. I want to point out all of this is a con. The people pushing this don't give a crap about diversity, equity, or inclusion. For the people like the elites in Davos, this is about programming a specific way of thinking so they can get you to do what they need you to do. This is for engineering a generation of citizens that will be more than happy to get their approved messages from the local social update meetings. For others, it's about getting rich. The head of DEI at Berkeley is a woman named Diana Matos. If you ask anyone, any following of this, they will give you a blank stare if you ask them, what the heck is a DEI officer? What do you do? That doesn't hold back the financial compensation that these people roll in on. We looked up Diana's pay. She has a base salary of $325,000. For context, the 10th highest paying job in the U.S. is a pilot at $134,000. Fourth, a surgeon, $208,000. The first is an anesthesiologist at $208,000. All of these jobs either require advanced degrees, training, or both, and they don't even touch the salary of a person who is paid to tell white kids that they're racist and black kids you'll never make it. This is where we are. Mourn for the loss of your country, and then get ready to stand up. Because if we don't, the result is a very dark future, which just happens to be the name of my next book. Look for it in bookstores everywhere this summer. Thanks for watching. God bless America.